Most people say revenge is a dish best served cold. Let me tell you, they're wrong. True revenge isn't a dish at all. It's a 7-course meal, meticulously prepared, timed to perfection, and savored slowly while your enemies watch their world. Crumble Bite by Exquisite Bite. My name is Alexander Mercer. I'm a real estate developer by trade. When people hear that, they immediately picture some slick-talking guy in an expensive suit, bulldozing historic buildings to erect soulless condos. Sometimes stereotypes exist for a reason. I've done exactly that. Made millions doing it too. But this isn't a story about business. It's about water. Contaminated water. And what happened when the wrong person drank it. That person was my mother, Eleanor Mercer. 72 years old, widowed, stubbornly independent, and the only person I've ever truly respected. While I was busy conquering real estate markets in Chicago and New York, she refused to leave her modest home in Oak Ridge Heights, the suburban neighborhood where I grew up. "Why would I move to some sterile penthouse?" she'd say during our weekly calls. "My life is here. My garden is here." I always sent her first-class tickets to visit me. Sometimes she even used them. 3 months ago, our routine Sunday call didn't come. When I tried reaching her, no answer. By evening, anxiety had me on a private flight back to Oak Ridge. I found her on her bathroom floor, barely conscious, severely dehydrated, with what the ER doctors later diagnosed as acute heavy metal poisoning. Has she been exposed to old paint? Batteries? Industrial chemicals? The doctor asked as my mother lay connected to IVs in the hospital room. "She lives in a suburban neighborhood," I replied. "The house was built in the 90s. No old paint. No industrial anything." "Well, something caused dangerous levels of lead and arsenic in her system. We need to identify the source." I hired a private environmental testing company before my mother was even discharged. Their conclusion was unsettlingly clear. Her water was contaminated. Not just slightly, significantly. Levels that violated every EPA standard. When I confronted the Municipal Water Authority, they seemed genuinely baffled. Their testing showed the water reached her neighborhood well within safety parameters. Something was happening between the municipal supply and her tap. That something, as I would soon discover, wore tailored pantsuits and called itself the Oak Ridge Heights Homeowners Association. "Mr. Mercer, what a surprise to see you in town." The woman who approached me outside my mother's house had the practiced smile of someone who had built a career on appearing pleasant while being anything but. "I'm Victoria Hamilton, president of the Oak Ridge Heights HOA. We've heard about your mother's unfortunate illness. How is she recovering?" "Slowly," I replied, studying Victoria more carefully than she probably realized. "Expensive clothes, designer handbag, jewelry that cost more than most residents' monthly mortgage payments." The HOA presidency was clearly a volunteer position, which made her obvious wealth interesting. "If there's anything the association can do," she offered, letting the sentence hang without actually committing to help. "Actually, there is. I need information about any work done on the neighborhood water lines in the past year." Her smile flickered, almost imperceptibly. "Water lines? Those would be a municipal concern, not HOA business." "Normally, yes, but I've been reviewing HOA meeting minutes." I held up my phone, where I'd downloaded years of records. There were 3 special assessments in the past 18 months for what was described as infrastructure improvements, specifically line replacements that required accessing the water system. Victoria's smile had now completely vanished. "Those were necessary upgrades to our aging infrastructure, all properly approved and permitted. I'd like copies of those permits and the contractor information." "I'll have to check with our board," she replied, taking a step back. "These records aren't immediately available. They should be. Transparency is required under state law for homeowners associations. I'm sure you're aware of that, as president." For a moment something genuinely cold flickered behind her eyes. Calculation and assessment. I recognized it immediately. It was the same look I gave opponents across negotiating tables right before I decided whether to compromise or destroy them. "I'll have our secretary contact you," she said finally. "Today," I insisted. "We all volunteer our time, Mr. Mercer. We work as quickly as possible. My mother drank poisoned water for months while paying your association fees. I suggest you work very quickly indeed." As she walked away, I noticed her immediately pull out her phone. From her body language, the rigid posture, the sharp gestures, she wasn't ordering flowers for my mother. By evening, instead of receiving contractor information, I got a cease and desist letter from the HOA's attorney, warning against defamatory statements regarding water quality that could unnecessarily alarm residents and negatively impact property values. Most people would have been intimidated. I was delighted. Only guilty people lawyer up that quickly. Game on. The first rule of war: know your enemy. The Oak Ridge Heights HOA was run by a board of 5 women, all over 50, all longtime residents. Victoria Hamilton, the president, was married to a retired pharmaceutical executive. Their combined net worth was substantial, though I noticed their investment portfolio had taken significant hits recently. The vice president, Elizabeth Winters, was a former regional bank manager whose husband had left her for his administrative assistant 3 years ago. Since then, she'd channeled her considerable organizational skills and even more considerable bitterness into HOA enforcement. The remaining board members, Treasurer Patricia Lansing, Secretary Margaret Collins, and Enforcement Committee Chair Susan Bloom, were similar profiles. Comfortable but not wealthy, educated but not exceptional, and completely invested in the microscopic power that comes from regulating your neighbor's mailbox colors and grass height. The second rule of war: find the weak link. In this case, it was Margaret Collins, the secretary. During my deep background research, which went far beyond what most people would consider legal or ethical, I discovered her son had recently been rejected from his top-choice colleges and was struggling with depression. Margaret was drowning in worry and distraction. I accidentally encountered her at the local coffee shop. "Mrs. Collins?" "Alexander Mercer, Eleanor's son." I extended my hand with just the right amount of hesitant recognition, as if trying to place her. "I think we met at the neighborhood 4th of July picnic years ago?" Of course. She seemed relieved that I wasn't immediately confrontational. "How is your mother doing?" "Such a terrible thing." "Improving, thankfully." Actually, I could use your help. I lowered my voice. "I've been trying to get information about the recent water line work, but I'm getting stonewalled. As secretary, you must have access to those records?" Margaret glanced around nervously. "I should direct you to Victoria for—" "I've tried that route," I interrupted gently. "Look, I'm not looking to blame anyone. I just need to understand what happened so I can make sure Mom's house is safe for her to return to." Her expression softened. "I understand. I have teenage children myself. If anything happened to them—" I nodded sympathetically, neglecting to mention that my research had already told me everything about her 19-year-old son's recent struggles. "The contractor was Southern Municipal Systems," she said quietly. "But you didn't hear that from me. There were issues with the work." "What kind of issues?" She checked her watch anxiously. "I have to go. But if you're investigating, you might want to look into the connection between Victoria's husband and SMS. He sits on their parent company's board." As she hurried away, I smiled. The weak link had delivered precisely what I needed: confirmation of my suspicions and a direction for further investigation. The third rule of war: build an overwhelming arsenal before firing the first shot. Southern Municipal Systems had indeed performed the waterline replacements for Oak Ridge Heights. On paper, they'd used industry-standard materials. In reality, A careful examination of shipping manifests, obtained through methods best left undescribed, showed they had substituted significantly cheaper components, materials explicitly not rated for potable water systems. The substitution had saved approximately $245,000 on the project. Interestingly, Victoria Hamilton and her husband had purchased a vacation property in Hilton Head 3 months after the project's completion. Purchase price, $240,000. Coincidences do happen. But not that kind, not that exact. I spent 2 weeks building my case, methodically gathering evidence that would have made a federal prosecutor envious. Private investigators photographed evidence. Forensic accountants traced money flows. Environmental engineers documented contamination patterns, all while visiting my mother in the hospital daily, watching her slowly recover while rage built inside me like pressure in a sealed container. When I had enough evidence to bury them 10 times over, I made my next move. Not confrontation. Not yet. First came strategic positioning. I established a shell company called Mercer Holdings and began quietly purchasing properties around Oak Ridge Heights. Not within the HOA boundaries, that would come later, but surrounding. Properties that controlled key access points and, more importantly, easements. Most people don't understand easements. Those legal rights that let someone else use part of your property for specific purposes. In this case, water and sewer lines to Oak Ridge Heights ran through parcels I now controlled. Next, I identified the mortgage holder for the Oak Ridge Heights common areas. The park, clubhouse, and communal spaces technically owned by the HOA but financed through a commercial loan. Unsurprisingly, they were behind on payments, likely because funds were being diverted to tropical real estate. I purchased that debt from the lender at a premium, making me the HOA's creditor. Position established. Now for the opening move. The quarterly HOA meeting was held in the Oak Ridge Heights clubhouse, a building my research revealed was now effectively mine through the debt acquisition. I arrived 10 minutes early, taking a seat in the back row, dressed not in my usual bespoke suit, but in casual attire that wouldn't stand out. Victoria Hamilton called the meeting to order at precisely 7 p.m., running through procedural matters with officious efficiency. When she reached new business, I raised my hand. The chair recognizes. "I'm sorry, your name?" Victoria squinted, pretending not to recognize me. "Alexander Mercer. I'd like to discuss the neighborhood water quality issues and the recent line replacements by Southern Municipal Systems." A ripple of murmurs went through the room. Water contamination rumors had begun circulating, despite the board's efforts to suppress them. Victoria's smile was brittle. "Mr. Mercer, while we sympathize with your mother's illness, there's no evidence linking it to our community water system. The HOA has conducted independent testing that shows all parameters within acceptable limits." "Interesting," I replied, standing. "Because I've also conducted testing. Comprehensive testing at 12 different homes across the neighborhood. Would you like to see the results?" I approached the front, placing a stack of reports on the table. These showed dangerous levels of lead, arsenic, and cadmium leaching from the substandard pipes installed last year. Pipes that were substituted for the approved materials without proper disclosure or inspection. The room erupted in concerned voices. Victoria banged her gavel repeatedly. "These claims are unfounded and irresponsible. You're causing unnecessary panic." "Am I?" I turned to face the homeowners. 3 residents of Oak Ridge Heights have been hospitalized with symptoms consistent with heavy metal poisoning in the past 6 months. My mother was merely the most severe case. This was news to most residents, judging by their shocked expressions. The board had kept these incidents quiet. Elizabeth Winters stood, her voice sharp. "This meeting has an agenda that doesn't include unsubstantiated accusations. If you continue, we'll have you removed." "By all means," I replied. "Call the police." I'd welcome their involvement, considering the evidence I have of material substitution, misappropriation of HOA funds, and what appears to be a clear connection between project savings and Mrs. Hamilton's new vacation home. Victoria's face went white. The other board members exchanged alarmed glances, all except Margaret Collins, who suddenly found her shoes fascinating. "These are serious allegations," Patricia Lansing said, attempting damage control. "If you have concerns, the proper channel is to submit them in writing to the board for review." "I've done better than that," I replied. "I've submitted them to the EPA, the State Attorney General's office, and the FBI Public Corruption Unit. They seemed quite interested." Complete chaos erupted. Residents shouting questions, board members attempting to restore order, and through it all, I maintained eye contact with Victoria, whose expression had shifted from shock to something darker, something calculating. As the meeting devolved further, I stepped out, my opening move completed. The residents were now aware, suspicious, and angry. The board was on defense, and I was just getting started. The next morning, water testing vans appeared throughout the neighborhood, not sent by me, but by panicked residents after the previous night's revelations. By afternoon, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from homeowners seeking information, advice, or simply someone to blame, besides themselves, for ignoring their HOA's corruption. I directed them all to the same law firm, another entity I quietly controlled, to discuss a class action lawsuit. Victoria Hamilton attempted damage control through an emergency newsletter claiming I was a disgruntled outsider, spreading unverified claims to drive down property values for unknown purposes. She urged residents to maintain confidence in your elected board. It might have worked if not for two developments. First, the preliminary results from residents' water tests confirmed my claims. Contamination was widespread and significant. Second, news vans arrived after an anonymous tip, mine, about potential criminal negligence in a suburban water supply. Nothing attracts homeowner attention like seeing their neighborhood on the evening news. By day 3, the entire board except Margaret Collins had stopped answering their phones or doors. Victoria's husband was reportedly traveling on business indefinitely. I received a call from Elizabeth Winters, the vice president, requesting a private meeting. We met at a diner 20 miles away, where she was unlikely to be recognized. She'd aged years and days, the carefully maintained facade of suburban perfection crumbling under stress. "What do you want?" she asked without preamble. "Money? An apology? What will make this go away?" "This doesn't go away, Elizabeth. People were poisoned. My mother nearly died." "It wasn't all of us," she insisted. "Victoria and her husband arranged the contractor. The rest of us just didn't look closely enough." Negligence by the entrusted officers of a corporation, which is what your HOA legally is, doesn't excuse liability. It establishes it. She deflated visibly. "So there's nothing we can do?" "I didn't say that. There's plenty you can do. Starting with full cooperation with investigators, documentation of instructions you received, meetings not recorded in official minutes, financial transactions you questioned. You're asking me to turn on my friends. I'm offering you a chance to mitigate your own culpability. Victoria is already planning to blame the rest of you. I've seen the draft statement her attorney prepared. This was a complete fabrication, but Elizabeth's expression told me it was entirely believable to her. The trust among the board was already shattered. "What exactly do you need from me?" she asked. "Rule 4 of war, divide and conquer." Within a week, I had signed cooperation agreements with 3 of the 5 board members, each racing to provide evidence against the others in exchange for reduced liability in the inevitable lawsuits. Only Victoria remained defiant, having hired a high-profile defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crime. The neighborhood had descended into chaos. Residents were using bottled water exclusively. Property values had plummeted. Real estate listings in Oak Ridge Heights tripled as people tried to escape what was quickly becoming a toxic asset in more ways than one, which is precisely when I sprang the trap. On Monday morning, every homeowner in Oak Ridge Heights received a certified letter from Mercer Holdings, LLC, informing them that the company had acquired all outstanding debt on the HOA common properties due to covenant violations related to water safety. That debt was now in default. Additionally, Mercer Holdings had purchased the private streets within the development through a tax lien auction. Effective immediately, new access and usage fees would be implemented for all non-residents. The brilliant part? By their own HOA definition, any homeowner with outstanding violations or unpaid fines was considered a non-resident for amenity privileges. And thanks to Elizabeth's cooperation, I had documented evidence that Victoria had systematically targeted certain homeowners with aggressive enforcement while ignoring violations by her allies. This selective enforcement invalidated all outstanding violations under state law, except those against the board members themselves, who had accumulated thousands in unpaid fines they'd exempted themselves from. In simpler terms, I now controlled who could use the streets to access their homes. The board members were locked out, literally. When Victoria attempted to return home after a meeting with her attorney, she found the entrance to her street blocked by a security guard who politely explained that without an access permit, she couldn't proceed. "This is absolutely illegal," she shouted when I answered her furious phone call. "You cannot restrict access to private property." "You're right," I agreed. "You cannot legally restrict homeowners from accessing their property. That's why I'm not doing that. I'm restricting non-residents from using privately owned streets without proper authorization. I am a resident. According to the bylaws you yourself enforced so vigorously, any member with outstanding violations loses resident status until those violations are remedied. You currently have 17 violations totaling $42,500 in fines, plus interest." "What violations?" "This is absurd. Improper material substitution, failure to maintain water safety, misappropriation of funds. They're all detailed in the covenant you wrote. I'm simply enforcing it." Her voice turned venomous. "You entitled, vindictive bastard. My lawyer will—" "Do nothing," I finished for her, "because everything I've done is perfectly legal using the very system you created and exploited. The difference is, I have better lawyers, deeper pockets, and a legitimate grievance." After she hung up, I received 4 more similar calls from the other board members. Each conversation ended the same way. They couldn't go home without my permission, which I was prepared to grant, for a price. The terms were simple. All current board members would resign immediately. They would forfeit their properties to the HOA. As compensation for damages, they would provide complete testimony regarding the waterline fraud in exchange. They would receive immunity from criminal prosecution. It was, essentially, financial suicide for them. But the alternative was potential jail time for criminal negligence, fraud, and corruption. Victoria held out the longest. For 3 days, she lived in a hotel, while her attorney sought injunctions that were promptly denied by judges who recognized the legal soundness of my position, if not its moral ambiguity. On the 4th day, she capitulated. One by one, the board members signed over their homes and resigned their positions. The properties would be sold, with proceeds going toward remediation of the water system and compensation for affected residents. My mother returned home to a neighborhood in transition. A new water system was being installed, properly this time, with independent inspection at every stage. A temporary residence committee was governing in place of the dissolved HOA board, with plans for a complete restructuring of the governance model. And the former board members? They scattered to different cities, their reputations and finances in ruins. Victoria and her husband reportedly moved in with their son in Phoenix. Elizabeth took a job managing a motel in Tennessee. The others similarly disappeared into reduced circumstances far from Oak Ridge Heights. "Don't you think you went too far?" my mother asked as we sat on her porch, watching workers replace the water main on her street. "They made a terrible mistake. But to take everything from them—" "They poisoned people for profit," I replied. "They nearly killed you, and you destroyed them in return. Where does that cycle end, Alex?" I had no answer for her. Revenge had been complete and satisfying, but the hollowness that followed surprised me. I'd won absolutely, crushed my opponents beyond recovery, yet something felt unfinished. 2 weeks later, I found out what it was. The knock on my hotel room door came at 11:30 p.m. I opened it to find a teenage girl, perhaps 17, with red-rimmed eyes and a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. "Are you Alexander Mercer?" she demanded. "Yes. Who are you?" "Sophie Hamilton, Victoria's daughter." She thrust the paper toward me, a suicide note from Victoria's husband, who had taken his life the previous night in their son's garage. "He couldn't handle the shame," Sophie said, her voice breaking. "Everything was gone. Their money, their home, their reputation. Mom's on psychiatric hold now. My brother doesn't want us in his house anymore." I stood frozen, the paper heavy, in my hand. "I just wanted you to see what winning looks like," she continued. "I hope it feels good." As she turned to leave, I found my voice. "Wait, where are you going?" "Does it matter? Our family is destroyed. Mission accomplished, right?" The bitter triumph I'd felt weeks earlier crumbled completely, leaving only the acrid taste of having become exactly what I despised, someone who valued money and power over human dignity. "I can help," I said, not sure what I was offering or why. Sophie laughed harshly. "Haven't you helped enough? Just leave what's left of my family alone." After she left, I sat for hours reading and rereading the suicide note, seeing for the first time the human cost of my perfect revenge. Victoria and her husband had been guilty. Yes, they'd committed crimes that caused real harm, including nearly killing my mother. But I hadn't sought justice. I'd sought annihilation. The next morning, I made a series of calls. To my attorney, setting up trust funds for the children of all former board members, specifically for education and health care. To a mental health facility, arranging payment for Victoria's treatment. To a rehabilitation center that specialized in heavy metal poisoning, ensuring all affected residents would receive ongoing care. None of this erased what I'd done, or what they had done. The former board members would never regain their former lives. My mother would always carry the effects of her poisoning. The neighborhood would bear the scars of corruption and vengeance for years to come. But maybe, just maybe, the cycle could begin to end. 6 months later, Oak Ridge Heights had a new name, a new water system, and a new governance structure that emphasized transparency and shared responsibility. The homes of the former board members had been converted into community spaces, a library, a wellness center, gardens. My mother, recovered enough to travel, finally accepted my invitation to visit New York. "You've been quiet about Oak Ridge lately," she noted as we had dinner in my penthouse overlooking Central Park. "Do you regret what happened?" "I regret that it was necessary," I replied carefully. "And I regret how far I took it." She studied me with the penetrating gaze that had always seen through my defenses. "You know, when you were little, I used to worry about that streak in you. The one that couldn't stand losing, that had to win at any cost. Apparently I haven't outgrown it." "No, but maybe you're finally seeing its price." She reached across the table to take my hand. "Revenge fills the space where healing should go, Alex. It satisfies, but it doesn't repair." Pretty philosophical. "For someone who nearly died from criminal negligence," I observed. She smiled sadly. "Nearly dying has a way of clarifying what matters. It isn't winning. It's living well afterward." As I looked at her, frailer than before but still fundamentally unbroken, I understood something I'd missed in my calculated campaign of destruction. The true victory wasn't in crushing those who had harmed her. It was in ensuring she could return to a safer home, a better community, a life where corruption had been exposed and eliminated. Justice, not vengeance, should have been my aim. I'm not sure I'll ever fully reconcile the satisfaction I felt watching Victoria Hamilton's world burn, with the shame of seeing her daughter's devastation. Both feel authentic to who I am. Both represent truths about power, responsibility, and consequences. What I do know is this: when you set out to destroy your enemies completely, you risk destroying parts of yourself in the process. The street runs dry for everyone in the end. Sometimes victory costs more than defeat would have. But sometimes, the price is worth paying to ensure no one else drinks poisoned water from a system built on corruption and indifference. The question that remains, that will always remain, is whether I went too far in seeking justice or not far enough in showing mercy. I suspect I'll never know the answer, but at least I've finally learned to ask the question.